So great. So happy to present this topic today. Um, I suggest as we move through this topic, we should relate it to what your field is. As I go through these concepts and I go through some of the themes of these of the proposal, I suggest you relate it to your field of study. And please write down your questions or put it on the chat as and when we go, and we'll take it one by one from there. So before we start, can we have someone answer? I mean, just unmute and answer. Can you relate research to something which happens in your everyday life? I'll repeat that question. Can you relate research to something which happens in your everyday life? Can you draw a parallel of research into something which happens in your everyday life? Didn't get you. So I was just asking, can you draw a parallel? What you do every day, can you relate it to research? Something like, what is research for me and what I do in everyday life? There is some correlation between these two. Do you do that? Do you have some similarity between research and something you do every day? Let me put it this way. See, for me, research is a lot like cooking. Okay. So when you walk into the kitchen, you make a very complex dish just because you want to cook for your family or for the guests who come home. You don't just start by throwing in ingredients together and hope that it's going to turn out to be a very good dish. You actually begin with a recipe, right? From the first part is you start with a recipe. You have a plan. So your recipe contains ingredients, what time you're going to cook, what is the method in which you're going to cook, how long it should be in that particular method. Say, if you're going to boil some veggies, how long is the veggies going to be boiled for? The meat is going to be cooked for how long? So there's an outline and there's a plan the recipe gives you, right, of what you want to create, and what ingredients you need and what steps gets you to that particular recipe at the end of the day. So for me, both cooking and research require a lot of preparation. Okay, so you prepare as a chef, as a person who cooks. You go through the entire recipe even before you start cooking, right? You gather all the ingredients. You first do your shopping of all the ingredients. You keep your ingredients ready. If it has to be scraped, if it has to be cut, if it has to be boiled. So you do all these preparations and you keep the right tools. You keep your knife, you keep your butcher knife, you have your fork, you have your spoon. So you have everything. You have your dishes for cooking, you have your fire, you have your gas. All these are little preparations which you need when you do the cooking. Similarly, as a researcher, you need to do your groundwork even before you start research. So research, you cannot say it has started the moment you read an article or the moment you wrote 10 pages. You never know when your research really started, and you will never know when your research really finishes. So the beginning and the end depends on you, the researcher, right? So you can't, what do I say? When it comes to research, you develop clear questions. You write precise questions of what you want to find out. You write appropriate methods in which you would use and the methodology you will use to attain that question. And then what is the process in which you'll go in for your data collection? So all these, you would prepare yourself even before you start your research, right? Another important aspect of any research, and I think it's the most key point here, is timing. Okay, timing matters when you do your research. You don't see, like again, in cooking, you don't rush to finish your souffle. When you're preparing a souffle, you have to cool it, you have to refrigerate it for some time. So similarly, when you do an analysis, whenever you do a collection, each has its time frame and a deadline, and that has to be respected and followed. So you require a lot of patience, you require a lot of attention to detail, and also the wisdom to know when to stop and when to continue. You get what I'm saying on this. So it's very important, the timing, the amount of effort you put in, it all depends on you, but it also requires planning. So a research proposal is just like your recipe. It's just a very good recipe which tells you which dish you're worth making, what ingredients are essential, same as with research. And now I would say the only thing is there are people who are going to thank you at the end of your dish. The moment you serve their dish after you're cooking, people are going to thank you and praise you. But in research, I don't think you get your thanks. More than anything, you get your reviews, you get your rejections, you get your failures, but that also adds betterment for the recipe. It betters your research. That's how you should look at a research. And coming to what exactly a research proposal is, to simply put it in very simple terms, it's a blueprint for any research which you want to do. Okay, think of it like an architect's plan for a building. He wants to construct a building. So what does he do? He starts from the base. So that's what a research proposal does. Even before you have your ingredients in place, you start writing your proposal, even if it has a gaps in between. You exactly don't know where the methodology, what is the exact questions you're going to ask. Even then, you start writing what you are exactly at the moment you're aware of. You write those points first, and then develop on your research proposal. Okay. So a research proposal has different purposes, as you can see. It first, it demonstrates as a communication tool. So essentially making a case to others with your research proposal, whether you are communicating to your advisor, to a committee member, or to a funding agency of what exactly your research is your research worth doing in the first place, and that you're the right person to do that research. So these are the three key themes under which your proposal will be selected. So first, you have to find out what is your research, what is your topic. Second is, what is your research worth doing in the first place? Does it matter? Does your research have an impact in the society? Does it matter? And the third one is, are you the right person to do that research? So these are very important points which you have to communicate through your research proposal. The second is planning. A research proposal is a planning tool for you. So the process of writing a proposal forces you to think through every aspect of your research, even before you begin it. So it's an upfront investment, and by doing it, you save countless hours of, any rejections which happen at the last moment or any pitfalls which may come. So you save your time by framing a very good research proposal. And finally, a research proposal is a roadmap. Okay, it's a roadmap kind of a tool for you, which helps you and keeps you on the track always, okay, throughout your research journey. So when you hit some obstacle, when you know you feel overwhelmed, that you're not able to handle certain things, you can return back to your proposal and remind yourself that what exactly was expected out of it. What was expected out of the research? What did you plan to do for this research? So things like this, the research proposal will guide you. It's a roadmap. Okay. Right. Now, the next question comes as to for what and why a research proposal is needed. See, a research proposal is needed because it's for two people. You're not writing your research proposal only for you. You're writing it for yourself to let you know what you are and where you are. And secondly, you're writing it for your supervisor, for your funders, to let them know, as well as for your other researchers, co-researchers, to let them know what exactly your research is talking about. Okay, so for you personally, writing a proposal is like having a conversation with yourself about your research. It forces you to ask some hard questions, which you ask yourself, like, is this research doable? Can I go through this research all by myself? It's a lonely journey, no doubt. So you keep asking this question: do I have the skill to do this research? Do I have the sufficient resources to carry this research? What are the possible pitfalls which I may come across? What are the wrongs I may commit during this research? So these are hard questions, and I'm sure you would not know the answers to this at the moment. But nevertheless, a proposal should be prepared to give you a guiding, a sort of a Bible, a sort of a guidebook for you to come back and refer to. So these questions, these self-reflecting questions, often reveals certain issues you hadn't considered during the time you started writing it, but it will eventually help you refine your approach. You understand? That's one. Then also, another point is it also creates an accountability. Once you've committed to a timeline in your research proposal, or you've committed to the methodology of writing your thesis or your dissertation, you most probably will follow it. Okay. And if you need to make any changes also later, you have a baseline to measure as to what can be changed and what can be retained. So the proposal in that way helps you guide and keeps you in focus. If you see from the evaluator's point of view, from the evaluator's perspective or the supervisor's perspective, your proposal is a window into your own mind of what you are as a researcher. You are communicating to the evaluator what kind of a researcher are you. So the researcher is not only evaluating your research idea, the evaluators also start evaluating you. What kind of a person is this researcher? Is this researcher able to think critically to answer these questions? Does this researcher understand the field in which he or she is studying? Can this researcher plan? Can this researcher execute a complex project? So all these questions are asked, and all these questions will be answered through a research proposal. And hence, a well-written proposal will demonstrate all these research competencies. So this is why a research proposal is needed. So I would say a research proposal is more of a gatekeeper kind of a job. It gives you many opportunities. So the proposal may not be just an academic research proposal. It can be even for a research funding. It can be for a degree program. It could be for a joint co-collaboration work for a project together. So it can be for different purposes. And why this research proposal is important and what is the purpose of it is that it can be efficiently used for both, for the researcher as well as the evaluator. So the research proposal, these are basically the components, or I would say the anatomy of any proposal. While very specific requirements may vary across institutions, across fields, across the study, the different areas in which you come from, but most proposals contain these core elements as headings. That is the title and abstract. Then you write your introduction. Then you write your literature review. You write your research questions. You write your methodology, your timeline, your budget, the references, and the appendices. So this is the structure in which any research proposal is written. I would say that the title and abstract serve as the first impression. So if you're able to captivate your evaluator, your supervisor, and the other co-scholars by giving a very good title and an abstract, I think you've hit the nail. you've done half the job. It should be, I would explain all these in detail in the next few slides. But the title and abstract, I just want to say here that that's the first impression which you need to grab. The introduction and literature also will establish the context. It will also demonstrate to you what expertise you have in your field. And it provides also the basis of how you want to be evaluated, or the decision for the funding. In case you're preparing a research proposal for a funding purpose, then by reading the introduction, the funders will be able to decide on how the funding process, the decision is made, right? So the research questions are the heart of any proposal. And if you're able to frame really good and strong research questions, nothing like it, you'll be able to bring out a very good methodology. The methodology derives from the research questions. The timeline and the budget also demonstrates how practical you're approaching the research problem and how well you wish to implement it. So if you're able to draw a timeline, a roadmap to tell them that you're going to finish it within these number of years or number of months, also along with the budget. Of course, the budget is, it depends on the type of research proposal. So then the references and then the appendices. Why I've put the references and appendices is because it's very important who you refer. Most of the evaluators always want to know if you're referring the real academicians who talk on these subjects. Instead of generalizing the topic, they want to know if really the people who matter are being referred to in the research proposal. So having looked at this, let's start from the first component which you have to start working on. And that would be conducting your literature review. So if you see in the previous slide, I said the title and the abstract is the first one which is forming the crux. However, practically, the first step would be to conduct your literature review, right? Most students get stuck at the beginning here itself when the literature review is about to happen. But take it from me that this is such an important section for demonstrating your expertise, and it helps you position your research in a very systematic and a scientific manner. So your literature review serves some key purposes. Why would you do the literature review? First, it demonstrates the knowledge of the existing research. So what has already been studied needs to be clearly written down by you in the proposal. Okay, you're showing the evaluators that you have done your homework here and that you have understood what the previous researchers have already studied in that particular field. So that's very important. Second, you try to identify the gaps in the current understanding. Okay, you're not just summarizing everything that's written by different scholars and academicians. You kind of strategically analyze what is the existing work and how it relates to your research questions and where is that gap and how your research will be helping in filling that gap. That's where the literature review plays a role. The third one is to position your work within the field. So you're showing your co-researchers or your evaluators that your research will connect in future to the existing knowledge of academics, and from where this knowledge also comes from. So it's a two-way communication. And finally, it shows how your research builds on previous work rather than just repeating what's already been done. So this is very key, though I've put it as the last and the fourth point. It's very key. You don't want your research to be a repetitive work of someone done elsewhere. You could probably say that in India, this work was done, vis-a-vis in China, this work was done. But still, however, the gap between these two researchers is where my research fits in. Okay, and that's the beauty of why we conduct a literature review. And doing this literature review you need some strategies to build your literature. Okay, because what happens is with, say, for a PhD, I guess you should be having at least 200 articles, at least 10 to 15 books. And to arrange all this, to organize the literature, it's going to be a tedious task. So there are apps, there are softwares where you can arrange and organize the literature according to your themes or your concepts. However, when you write a research proposal, there are certain strategies under which you write your proposal. And the three strategies are chronological, thematic, and methodological. By chronology, as the name suggests, you write it as it evolved over time. So your subject, how it evolved over time, your literature review will be written chronologically. Okay? Thematic, if you're going to write it in the way it's going to be thematically organized, your literature, you're going to be providing distinct schools of thought or key concepts which you address, and how your research questions are derived from these school of thoughts or paradigms. If you're going to use the methodological way of writing your literature review, which is again a very scientific way of writing, I think you will be using different research approaches, okay, which has contributed, and how these research approaches have helped develop the insight, your research insight, is how you will strategize or you will organize your literature review. Now, whatever the approach you choose, okay, be it chronological, thematic, or methodological, make sure every source you include, it serves a clear purpose and it builds your argument. It's very important, because you may write it chronologically, but at the end, when you write your questions, they may not link your argument to it. So you may feel comfortable writing it thematically, but your questions and your methodology may not want the thematic way. Maybe it would prefer a methodological way. So you may have to go back and forth when you start writing your literature review. So the choice of which type of literature review you want to choose and which organization strategy you want to choose is entirely depends on you, your research, your study, and your timeline. Right? So when we have all this literature arranged and we have them read systematically, you will draw an outline. Okay? You will draw an outline of concepts, you will draw an outline of themes and ideas that emerge from the literature. And that's when you frame or formulate research questions. So your research questions is the blood or the main fulcrum based on which your entire proposal stands. So everything else, your literature review, your methodology, your timeline, your budget, everything will be designed, and it will help you design or answer your questions effectively if your research questions are very strong. And framing strong research questions is a key to any good research. So there's this saying, the moment you frame a question, your research is half done. Trust me, again, when you're halfway of research, your questions also get modified. Because your data may not speak what the research question you had framed spoke. So there could be modifications, but stick to framing a strong research question. And there are some characteristics of framing a strong research question. One is to be focused. By focused, I mean to be very specific and manageable, okay, in scope, so that you can answer to the point. At the same time, keep in mind the constraints which you have in terms of time, constraints in terms of resources, maybe even your expertise. You may not be a qualitative person, you may be a quantitative person, a person who's more on, data-oriented person. So keeping all this in mind, frame your research questions. Don't be avaricious when you frame your research questions. The second one is researchable, very important, because you frame a research question, but you're not able to evaluate them, or you're not able to investigate them empirically. it is going to be difficult to justify at the end of your research. So you need to be able to gather data to address that kind of a question you're asking. Okay. The third is they are very significant. So they address important questions or issues which matter. The research should have questions which matter, not just something which is personally affecting you or something which interests you alone, but something of importance to the field, and it contributes back to maybe the industry or the society or any stakeholders. It should have a significance, your research question. And lastly, it should be original. Why I say original is because that's where your research stands, something new from what was already existing. You are able to offer a new insight toward that particular field of research. Now, this does not mean that you need to discover something new, something revolutionary, something like, like Albert Einstein or something, but you should be able to be applying the existing approaches to a new population, to a new set of people, or even examining a new phenomenon or an already known phenomenon from a fresh angle. So that's why I say new insights. So already existing phenomenon, looking at it from a different perspective, or having an existing approach and applying it to a new set of people or a population. Okay, so these are the characteristics based on which a strong research question is framed. And so how do we ask these questions? Usually it's just not a what, how, why, for, when. It's not like that. You need to ask and frame your questions such that you are able to derive good answers and a good research from it. So if you're going to say you want to have a descriptive kind of a question, you can ask, why is this happening to the society? What is really happening in the current situation? Okay, so you kind of understand the current situation and apply it to that particular situation. That would be the first basic question you'd want to ask. You could also ask comparative questions like, how does something differ from another thing? Okay, how does this difference or similarity between the groups, between the conditions, or between even time periods, how does this happen? You can compare two time frames, say 2000, say before COVID, what happened? After COVID, what happens? Before recession, what happened? After recession, what happened? So two comparative things. Before recession, how did women play a role in this particular phenomenon? Vis-a-vis, how did a man play a role in this particular phenomena? So you can compare, be it gender, age, the groups can vary, conditions. And the third type of question which you could frame is a causal question. Invariably, we have causal questions, as in what causes what? Why did this happen? So it kind of brings in a relationship between two variables or the mechanism between two variables. So are adult children really being affected by the LGBT paradigms? Or is the LGBT paradigm affecting the psyche of an adult? Things like this. These two questions are causal. Which is causal, we do not know, but your research and your literature review will help you find out. So most research projects have multiple questions, so you need not have to frame just one research question. You can have multiple research questions. You can keep framing it at different levels. You can also combine, a descriptive question and a comparative question, a comparative and a causal question, depending, again, that's entirely up to you, depending on your research. But just make sure that you stick to that particular question. Because as and when, when we read literature, we kind of tend to be avaricious to know, let me study that, let me study. It draws you into learning more. So don't deviate from the main question you had earlier framed. So with this, with the research questions, it boils down again to you develop hypotheses. This is usually done in a quantitative research, but nowadays, even for qualitative research, they do develop propositions. So it could be propositions or hypotheses, which can be developed according to the research question. Now, if you're conducting a quantitative study, you likely need the hypothesis in addition to the research questions. So in simple terms, a hypothesis is a testable prediction of the relationship between variables. It need not be just two variables. It could be two and more variables. Now, when we define a hypothesis, again, they have its own characteristics. So exactly like a SMART, S-M-A-R-T, simple, measurable, accurate, reliable, and time-bound. Similarly, hypothesis also has characteristics. So for a good thesis, you need to be specific and measurable. You should be able to define exactly what your variables are in that particular context and how you're going to examine those variables in your research. How do you intend? Measurable meaning, how do you intend to measure them? What are the tools which you'll use to measure those variables? So these are one of the characteristics. The second one is they are based on theory or previous research. So there could be previous research or a theory which has already defined a particular variable. You can, derive it from there. You can even cite it saying that you have taken the variables from this particular theory or the previous research. The only thing is you don't guess, you don't make the evaluator guess what could be the meaning of this hypothesis or the variable. So actually you should be making an educated prediction. You should be able to define clearly your variables based on what's already known in your field. Okay. The third point is that they are falsifiable, meaning there should be some possible outcomes out of that particular hypothesis which you intend to prove. That is, you to prove the hypothesis wrong. If there's no way to say that your hypothesis is scientifically useful. Okay, so you should be clear about what is expected, what is the direction in which you want to frame the relationship between the two variables. Invariably, the research always is with two and more variables. So if you take an example here, students who participate in mindfulness training will show significantly lower levels of test anxiety compared to students who do not receive training. So this hypothesis very specifically mentions the variables mindfulness training and test anxiety. The direction of this relationship also is given. That is, it leads to lower anxiety. It also includes the comparison group. That is, the comparison group is the trained versus the untrained students. And hence, this is going to be testable with the appropriate measures. All right. So remember, it's perfectly acceptable if your data doesn't support your research, your hypothesis. Because there are some times after you collect the data, your hypothesis will go through revision again. Okay. And that's the beauty of science. That's the beauty of research, because it advances through disconfirming as much as confirmation. Okay. So what matters is that you make very clear, testable predictions based on very solid reasoning as to why your hypotheses were developed. Okay. And standing firm will probably even help you defend your research at the end of your thesis. All right. So from this, from the moment you've defined your hypothesis, you start choosing which methodology applies to your research. Okay. But even before that, what can I say? A methodology is the method in which your research plan becomes more concrete, becomes more actionable. It's the moment where you show that your feasible plan, that your plan which is written in black and white is more workable, and you're actually doing research. Okay, so the methodology is is I would say, a trailer, of exactly imagining what you want to do. But this derives only because you've framed your hypothesis and your research questions very well. You'll need to make several key decisions when you choose your methodology. First, you have to see the overall approach, whether it is a qualitative research, it's a quantitative research, or a mixed method research. For quantitative research, it's great when you want to test relationships, measure variables, or you want to generalize any findings. A quantitative research is good. For a qualitative research, maybe you would want to understand a phenomena or an experience. You want to explore meanings from people directly, participative research, or you want to examine some processes in depth. So then that's when you use a qualitative research. You use a mixed method research when you take the benefits of both the approaches, both the qualitative and the quantitative, but it requires a different expertise in handling multiple paradigms, okay, which automatically the research calls for. The research will speak to you at that point of time to tell you which method would be more feasible, right? So when you've decided your research method, you'll start designing your research. So whether you want to conduct the research as an experimental study, as a survey, as a case study, you want to do an ethnographic research. Now, each of these, the experimental is a quantitative, survey could be qualitative, case study can be quantitative and qualitative, or even a mixed method. So the design will be appropriate according to the approach which you have selected. Now, each has its different strengths and limitations, which again is a different, a different session, well, webinar session on its own. But this will be deriving from the approach. So the moment you fix what is your approach, your design evolves from there, okay? And the moment you fix what kind of research design you have finalized, your data collection methods will also evolve. Whether you want to go through an interview method, open-ended interview or a closed-ended interview, you want to go for a survey method, whether it's an email survey, it is a participant survey, whether you want to observe people, whether you want to go in for an archival research. So your data collection methods also are key points, but then that derives again from the research design. Later on, you go in for a sampling strategy, where the sampling strategy determines who you'll study, who you will recruit to study, who your participants will be. And this is very crucial because it affects what you can conclude, what you can include, what you can, because their answers are the one which define your data. So you should be very specific on your sampling strategy because their responses will change the perspectives of the research. And the last point I wish to, it may not be a key decision, but then it's very important, is the alignment. The principle of alignment is very important. That is, your methodology must match your research question and the literature review, the theories. It should have an alignment. It should flow from that. It shouldn't be somewhere you picked because I like it, because I saw someone do that particular method. It doesn't happen that way. You don't choose methods just because you're familiar with them or because it seems to be easy. My co-scholar did it. So you choose methods that will best answer your research questions and serve your research objectives. The next one. So like in the previous slide, I was talking about quantitative and qualitative approaches. I may not delve very deeply into this, but I just thought I'll put up the slide so that you just have a fair idea of what exactly is the difference between a quantitative and a qualitative approach. As you can see, a quantitative approach tests already existing theories through hypotheses, and you use numerical data. you have a larger sample size, and at the end of the data, after you analyze, you generalize your findings to the larger population, right? In a qualitative research, you kind of explore meanings and experiences through words, images, observations, through their feedback. It's relatively a smaller sample size, a very purposive sampling, and it helps you seek deeper meaning into the phenomena. Okay, so these are the two differences between qualitative and a quantitative approach. Now, writing a methodology section, it has certain structures. So I will just go through the structures of writing a methodology section. So you can probably take a screenshot of this, or I could send the slides as well. The first one is when you're writing the section, first you write the design. Okay, your methodology section should follow a very clear and logical structure that covers all the essential elements. Okay, you start with the research design, which is the overall approach and the rationale behind your research. Why is this best approach for my research, and how is it going to answer my research questions? Okay, what are the strengths? What are the limitations of this research design for the particular study? So all these will form your paragraph, just one or two paragraphs in your methodology section. When it comes to participants, you have to define your participants. Okay, you should be very specific, not just who you'll study, but who you don't mean to study as well. You have to define who you don't want in your study. Okay, how did you select them? On what basis were these participants selected? How do you intend to sample this population? Okay, for quantitative studies, you have to justify your sample size. There are some tools online on the web, as well as some tools on Microsoft Excel, where you can justify your sample size. Okay, for a qualitative study, you have to explain the sampling strategy and how you will know that you've gathered enough data. Where do you say enough is enough in your sample? So that justification you could propose in your methodology section. Okay, maybe a couple of paragraphs on the data collection as well. You could probably say how you intend to collect data, what instruments you wish to use. Again, these would come again from your literature review. If you're going to use existing instruments, how do you describe them? What is the amount of reliability and validity constructs which the questionnaire has in the previous study is what you can mention in the methodology section. Or there could be a research where you're developing new measures for a particular phenomena. If you're doing a qualitative study, you want to define a phenomena. You can also collect data and frame a measurement, frame a questionnaire, and tell people that you can explain the development process also. That also can be a form of a research. Maybe a couple of paragraphs. I know you wouldn't have come up to the analysis part during a research proposal, but this has to be mentioned, wherein how you research questions and your data, what kind of tool or what kind of analytical framework you're going to use, whether you're going to use SPSS or R or Stata, what kind of specific analysis you'll be conducting, which would be appropriate to study your data to answer your research questions, can be probably mentioned on the data analysis paragraph. The ethical consideration paragraph is a must for most of the universities in most countries. So hence I put this ethical consideration because it's increasingly important with AI and other, I wish not to reveal certain things, but with AI, I think ethical consideration also has equal importance. So you have to address issues of any institutional review board approvals, anything which is related to your university, any informed consent which you would want from the participants, any confidentiality details you'll want to reveal, any potential risk or benefits which the participants are to be aware of. You should write it down in a paragraph in the methodology section. There should be one section for limitations as well, because there is no research without any limitations. So every study has its constraints, and let's be upfront that everybody goes through this. So it shows that you have critically evaluated your research and you know what your research or what your limitations are. So this will give you more credibility when you submit it to your evaluator, that you're not overselling your research idea. Okay, and what you want to accomplish, that you're not over accomplishing it. So it's better you have a paragraph mentioning what are the limitations of your research. Now, having written all this, we come to the introduction and background. It looks a little funny though, because we started off with literature review and then methodology, and then we're coming to the introduction, which should be happening in the first. But practically, trust me, writing the introduction after you've done all this gives you a very new and a fresh perspective. It helps you frame your context. Okay, you explain why this research is needed in a better manner, because you've already told what you want to tell. So when you write your introduction and your background section, it's very easy to communicate. So in this section, you briefly overview what you will intend to investigate. You give your readers or your evaluators a purview of your research without getting into any methodological details. Okay, you give them a clear statement of your research proposal. You end it with a clear research, if I call it as the research statement of the problem, however you want to call it. What exactly do you wish to accomplish through this research needs to be stated in a small paragraph. So you structure your introduction like a funnel. You start with a broad context and you narrow down to very specific focus. You come down to a very specific focus, meaning your approach. You first, when you're writing it, you identify the gap, the problem of the current knowledge and practice. You explain what is the research question, how you intend to address the research, and you come down the end of the funnel by specifying the preview of your approach. Okay, this creates a very logical flow that helps readers understand why your research is at a very logical step in addressing an important issue and why this research matters. Okay, so keep it focused, keep it engaging. This part of the section should be a very engaging session. You have to excite your readers to read it so that they want to know more about your project, right? So, and then you come to crafting your title. Very surprising, why is the title at the end? But yes, you write your title only at the end of your research proposal. Maybe you have a fair idea of what the title and what you're going to intend to study, but framing the title is also a very, like I said in the initial of the presentation, I said framing a title itself involves a lot of, it's a catch point, you know, people get attracted the moment they see the title of your thesis. So it's a hard work. Framing a title is a hard work. You can write even 10 to 15 pages, but concising the whole context into 10 to 15 words is really hard work, trust me. It requires maybe a little help also from your supervisor or, you know, people experts in your field. But avoid using any jargons, any abbreviations. Be very specific on what variable you want to study. Mention the variables. All the variables in your research which you're intending to study should be in your title. Let it not be very generalized. Let it be very specific to the research. Okay, like I've given an example below. Just don't generalize it. Be very specific. When you write, okay, let me give you a practical tip. So please start writing different versions of your title from the beginning. Okay, throughout throughout your research proposal, even after you submit your proposal and after you get clearance from IRB, keep working on your title. Okay, because your focus may change. I wouldn't say change, your focus may sharpen. Okay, and because it has sharpened, your title also should sharpen. So don't be afraid to ask others which version is better than the other. So sometimes, when you are closed in your focus and very objective, I think someone's external expertise also helps you in crafting a very good title. Now, after you've done your title, the work is not over. You start writing your abstract. So your abstract is like a movie trailer for your research. It needs to tell you the complete story in a very miniature format. So maybe say 150 to 300 words. And maybe it can be like a 4-part. I have divided into a 4-part structure because that way you communicate your research very clearly to the supervisor or the funders. So you start with the problem, what issue you're talking about. This kind of hooks the reader to establishing why you should care about the problem you're talking about. All right. Then you can mention a method section in that. It could be just a liner where you could tell what method or what approach you're using for this research. Are you going to do an interview or a survey or an experiment? With whom are you going to study? So don't be bogged down in giving too much of information and details in this, but just a small liner just to simplify the method section. And finally, you can end with a significance a line which says, why does your research matter to the bigger population? What will you know after the research is done? What would any academician or a practitioner know from your research? Or how do you advance in the field of this research? How did the theory evolve over a period of time? So that significance also can be mentioned at the end of the abstract. I've mentioned again some 3 tips on how to write the abstract. Like I said, write this last, but place it first. Okay. So after you've done everything, you write it in the end. It's just a small juggling of papers, front and back. But writing it at the last will help you kind of bring in a concise picture to the research. Okay, make every word count. Don't waste your words because it's going to be 150 to 300 words. Make sure you give complete information in your abstract to make it effective, and ensure that it stands alone, that someone should be able to read just your abstract and understand why you're doing this research. Okay, so it should talk for yourself. So that's about the abstract. Timeline is very important. I said time is one important factor in doing research. Sometimes, you're pulled down by the supervisor's speed vis-a-vis your speed. This comparison, you go meet them, they're not there available. They are very fast and you are pretty slow. So it's always better to have a roadmap created, a timeline created, which is realistic. Let's not be very avaricious. Let's be very realistic in our timeline, and let's be very frank and open when we prepare this timeline. So please include very specific timelines for each and every work which you do. So when you would start doing literature review, when do you intend to complete literature review? At this point of time, I wish to say your literature review would not be completed. Even when you're writing your thesis, you would be tending to go back and refer to literature. But fair amount of research, fair amount of literature should have been collected within a time frame, is what I mean by literature review completion. Okay, a timeline should include also the IRB and ethics approval, how long it takes. Please go through your university guidelines, your college guidelines to see those timelines and match your timelines according to their timelines also. When do you intend to start data collection? How long is the data collection going to happen? Because data collection, getting participants on board and collecting data and making them sit and respond to your questionnaire or your interviews is time consuming, no doubt. So then data analysis, especially your qualitative analysis, is very time intensive. So please define that. Writing and revision time also needs to be mentioned. How much of time would you put in every day, every week, every month? How much of words you would have written for, say, 2 months, 3 months? How often would you revise that paper? So never underestimate these two work, writing and revision. It's very easy to say that writing and revision can be done overnight. Trust me, it doesn't. So please put it down on a piece of paper as to what is the timeline for these two jobs. And also your defense and submission deadlines also should match your timeline of research. So the practical tips here, I would say, is you build a buffer time for every activity you have framed, because you have to be prepared for unexpected delays. And a good rule of the thumb is to estimate how long you think each phase will take. And you add around, say, 20 to 50% more time. Okay. So you don't feel overwhelmed, you don't feel shocked that you were, or you don't feel, I would say, guilty that you were not able to achieve that at that particular point of time. So you consider your external factors also that might affect your timeline. And you plan, maybe prepare a Gantt chart, Gantt, Gantt chart, where you can easily, now you can easily frame your activities according to the time. Now, this framework need not be on a linear scale. It could be overlapping while you're collecting data. If it's a quantitative, you can also start by writing your first 2-3 chapters. When you're doing your literature review, you could have sent for data collection. So it could be also on a very overlapping phase. It need not be on a linear scale. Your timelines. Okay. And finally, work backwards on your deadlines. If you need to defend, say, in the month of May, then when does your draft have to be ready? That's how you work. When do I have time to revise? When do I submit to my supervisor to get her revision or his or her revision done? One revision or 2 revisions. So you work backwards on your deadline as well. And be realistic about your commitments, because there are so many of us who teach, who work, who have family obligations, who love to go out, who have friends. So consider everything together and work a nice timeline. Coming to this budget considerations, this is actually a very applicable oriented one. In case you go in for funding, in case your research proposal is for a research funding, then these budget considerations are looked into. I would want to say some practical tips here for budgeting. Research typically is a very costly affair in any field. Even if you say if you want to do it online, it's a very costly affair. So sometimes you may need some kind of equipment. If it's scientific, you may need a tool, a software. You have to buy it. So what seems reasonable in one context might not be expensive in another context. So get the quotation, get the proposed student offers, which some softwares give you beforehand, so that you can avail of the larger expenses. Okay, include the indirect costs for any institution which requires them. These cover any overhead costs which you have in terms of any facilities or administration purpose costs. Justify the major expenses you have. Don't just list and say the software costs $5,000, but justify and explain in your proposal as to why that particular software is necessary for your analysis, and that you didn't find any other alternative which would work better for your research proposal. So consider alternative funding also in case your institution would not provide some support I think you should combine funding from multiple sources to cover your total budget. Having said this, I'm sure we come through a lot of common pitfalls, which I guess whatever I have come across, we could avoid. Okay, so scope is one issue, which is extremely common. Some proposals are very broad. They try to solve all the problems in one field in just one single study. Like I said, don't be avaricious in studying. So you have to define your scope very, very skillfully. Okay, and very narrow it down very precisely. Okay, not too narrow, not too broad is what I mean there. Keep it realistic again. Don't be over ambitious. When it comes to the methodological problems, often they stem because of misalignment. Okay, I see some quantitative methods chosen to answer questions that really require qualitative exploration. So be very specific on what method and what question. If your question is a qualitative question and only through qualitative method you can answer that question, please stick to that. Don't mix too much of patterns in between, which will lead to a methodological problem. Okay, and when you're halfway through the research, it's very difficult to rework and start again from the beginning. Another point is the inadequate sample size. So, like I said, there are tools to identify or help you justify your sample size. So use them at the appropriate time. And many proposals also fail because you don't mention the limitations and the potential problems you would face in a research. Okay. And coming to the most important thing is the writing. Writing is very, it's an art, it's a skill all by itself. And writing issues can undermine even a good research idea. So if your research questions are very unclear, the readers can't evaluate whether your methods were appropriate, or if your literature review doesn't connect with your research questions, then it seems irrelevant. Or if your sections don't flow logically and your readers get confused, and the overall argument in your research doesn't fall in place. So the key to avoiding these pitfalls is to get feedback very early and frequently. Keep it, as a continuous process, and to be honest about what you realistically can achieve through this research, okay, given the constraints. Again, just to summarize some writing tips for the success, you use active voice whenever possible. It's better to use an active voice. This is more on a grammatical perspective. For a native speaker in English, I think this would, when the reader reads, it's easier for them to relate to the research problem. In fact, even the questionnaires also can be reworded into an active voice when you submit your surveys to the participants. Your interviews can be reworded so that your participants feel they have the need to answer the questions in the active voice. Okay, so define your technical terms, especially if your proposal might be read by people outside your specific field. There are some ambiguities when it comes to technically defining your variables or your technical terms or your concepts. The next point is you maintain a consistent terminology throughout your research. If you call something like you want to say social media use, so keep the source, and if you've defined social media use as a term in one section, in the next section, don't say it as an online engagement or the use of media, of social media. So keep social media use throughout your other sections as well, so that you are consistent when using your terms. And it is very clear, your sentences should be concise and expressing just one idea. When it comes to the structure and flow while writing, I guess you have to use headings, subheadings whenever you need, so that the reader is able to follow your argument. too much of subheadings also dilute the essence of the research. So make sure you have your headings and subheadings appropriately organized. You ensure a very logical progression of your ideas. Each paragraph should connect to the previous paragraph, and the last line should have a follow to the next paragraph. So that flow should happen. You should include smooth transitions to show how these ideas are relating to each other. And you could follow a formatting guideline according to your university, or you could frame a formatting guideline and follow it accordingly. It may be small things, but if you could start it at the initial phase, it could save a lot of time. Because formatting at the end, when you have, say, 250, 300 pages, it is very tedious to format that amount of work. And it could also show that you're very careless to your supervisor. So start it at the very beginning. You pay attention to any professional presentation of your work. You read your proposal loud, you revise your proposal on and off, make changes. If you find that any awkward phrase does not make sense to you or is very unclear explanations, see if you can use another term to redefine that particular concept. Okay. The last thing would be getting a feedback. I would say this to break it down into two things: getting a feedback and having a revision. Some people get a feedback, but they don't revise. They don't make the changes. They just get the feedback, keep it aside, and continue their work. Trust me, taking the feedback and revising your work gives you a better perspective. I would say a better research proposal. Makes you a better person as well as a researcher. So your supervisor or advisor should be the primary feedback source. But don't wait till they have the complete draft read. You reread it even before you submit to them, as also when after you've submitted to them, also keep reading your research proposal. You could share sections of the proposal as and when you complete. Now, this completely depends on how you and your supervisor work. So if they want it as sections, or if they want the whole proposal to be submitted as one full document, it depends on how you all want to work it out. You could also give it to your peers in your field who can offer some valuable perspectives, especially if they are familiar with the area of your research. Very important. You have writing centers, you have people who can consult in your fields. Maybe you could join groups and get feedback from them. You could also get feedback from subject matter experts. This also adds value to your research. And when asking for a feedback, be very specific on what you want from them. Are you looking for any bigger picture on the comments on the overall approach? Or you want some editing, or you want some clarity on some defining? So be very specific on what you're asking during the feedback. Specific questions you could ask is a research question clear, or it's very what do I say, very generalized? Should I specify my variables in the research question? Some questions like this asked to a subject matter expert will give you a better research proposal. Okay, you can redefine your questions. I was saying about revision strategies also, because see, good writing, not only feedback, the real writing or the real essence of a good writing comes only when you've revised it well. And you plan for multiple drafts and different types of revision. Maybe at one shot, have 2 or 3 drafts also, nothing wrong with it. When you do this, your first revision should be focusing on the content completely. Content in terms of, is the required sections enough? Do I have to include any more sections? Have I missed out any necessary information? Is my research questions clear? Is it answerable, measurable? These are the questions you'll ask. Maybe in the second revision, you could focus on the structure and ask, is the argument flowing logically? Am I Is the sections in the right order? Is the paragraphs connect to each other? The first and the second paragraph, the previous heading and the subheading, do they relate? Are there any gaps in the logic in which the proposal is written? So things like this can be done in the second revision. Maybe in the third revision, you can focus on clarity. You can probably explain or better your sentences, or even write an engaging or a technically corrected word. Things like that can be done. Maybe in the fourth revision, you can focus on your style. You can have it more engaging or more professional, a more scientific way of writing it. And maybe if you feel that grammar, spelling, and formatting requirements are needed, maybe one more revision you can go for. And when you do the revision, don't do it as a stretch. Take breaks in between, because from the first revision to the second revision, you need to have a different perspective. Otherwise, you're going to keep looking at the same mistakes again and not revising it. So step away for some time between drafts, and look back after you are having a fresher mind. Look at the draft from a fresh perspective. Read it aloud to catch any awkward phrase which you have, or any sentence which is, does not align well. Even better is to print it out, read it yourself, and see if you can catch any errors on the paper, which sometimes on screen you might have missed out. These are some of just a checklist even before you submit, which is, again, a revision of what we have discussed throughout here. With this, I think we'll pause for some reflection and some discussions. You could probably take 5 minutes, go through these questions, which I have put across here, to see if you can reflect on your own project and see if how significant your research questions are, and your method is right or wrong. You have any limitations in your research? If you want to contribute, how does your research contribute to your field? What is the significance you've mentioned in your research proposal? And we can maybe take it after the session also. These are some resources which could be helpful for you. From where to find them also. I've just listed down some little help on the research, on the resources, I'm sorry.